Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuschauer, zu einer neuen Folge von Im Auge des Bruders mit Scott Ritter hier auf unserem YouTube-Kanal Gegenpol. Mein Name ist Monique Stegemann und in dieser Woche haben wir folgende Themen. Polen verlegt massiv Truppen an die weißrussische Grenze. Plante Warschau einen Angriff auf Weißrussland oder gar eine Annexion der Westukraine? Welchen Wert haben die deutschen Leopard-Panzer für die Ukraine? Und US-Atom-U-Boote in Südkorea. Wohin treiben die USA die Eskalation gegen China? Hallo Scott, schön, dass du dir heute wieder die Zeit für uns genommen hast.
My pleasure.
Wir starten gewohnheitsgemäß direkt in die erste Frage.
Okay.
Polen verlegt derzeit massiv Truppen an seine Grenze zu Weißrussland. Offiziell wegen einer angeblichen Bedrohung durch die Gruppe Wagner. Tatsächlich werden Wagner-Soldaten derzeit eingesetzt, um die Streitkräfte Weißrusslands auszubilden. Wagner-Chef Prigoschin behauptet, er wolle in Weißrussland die zweitstärkste Armee der Welt aufbauen. Gleichzeitig betont der russische Präsident Putin, dass ein polnischer Angriff verheerende Folgen haben werde. Ich habe dazu zwei Fragen an dich, Scott. Wie schätzt du die Truppenverlegung in Polen ein? Bedeutet sie eine reale Gefahr für Weißrussland? Und was sagst du zu den Sticheleien des weißrussischen Präsidenten Lukaschenko, wonach die Wagner-Truppen bereit sein sollen, bis nach Warschau vorzustoßen?
Well, first of all, the movement of Polish troops is not a serious military movement. These are screening forces, tripwire forces, forces designed to create the impression that Poland is serious about protecting its security from any perceived threat. But when one takes a look at the actual force structure involved, these are not offensive troops. They're incapable of sustained offensive operations. And they're not even a serious defensive force. It's purely a political move. Lukashenko's statements were tongue-in-cheek. It's just purely, Lukashenko taking advantage of the stage that he had with President Putin and making lighthearted commentary. There was nothing serious at all about this. Wagner is neither organized, trained, or equipped to carry out offensive operations of the scope and scale necessary to threaten Warsaw. Indeed, Wagner, as it currently exists, couldn't threaten the Polish border. They don't have any heavy equipment, no tanks, no armored fighting vehicles, no artillery, no ammunition. If you remember Prigozhin's, complaints about shell hunger, there is no ammunition. This was all used to be provided by the Russian Ministry of Defense, and as things currently stand, the Belarus government is not providing Wagner with a similar level of support. So this is just all, hot air. There's nothing to it. What isn't hot air is Vladimir Putin's admonition to Poland about any potential intervention in Western Ukraine. There is talk amongst the Polish government, the Ukrainian government, about a potential union that some believe could be exploited by Poland and perhaps in affiliation with some of their Baltic allies to deploy troops into Western Ukraine, in response to any perceived threat coming from Western Ukraine. That could include refugees or anything. So I think Vladimir Putin, President Putin, has made it clear that Russia won't look kindly upon any such ambitious activity by Poland.
In einer gemeinsamen Pressekonferenz haben Putin und Lukaschenko ihre Bedenken geäußert, dass Polen möglicherweise plant, in die Westukraine einzumarschieren und diese zu annektieren. Hältst du das für ein realistisches Szenario? Ist Polen in der Lage, eine solche Operation durchzuführen, oder steckt dahinter eine Strategie der NATO?
Well, do the last part first. NATO will not get involved in a ground war in Ukraine. That is an absolute certainty because it leads to direct conflict with Russia, which leads to the inevitability of nuclear weapons being used, which means the destruction of NATO, Europe, everything they ostensibly exist to defend. So no, NATO will not get involved in Ukraine. The United States has made it clear that it won't get involved and is the most powerful and influential member of NATO. NATO won't act without an American green light, and an American green light will never be given. As I previously said, Poland and Ukraine are talking about a political union, which may lead to the erasure or minimizing of the border between Poland and Ukraine. And under that circumstance, one could conceive of Polish troops entering Western Ukraine at the invitation of the Ukrainian government. This could happen if there was a precipitous collapse of Ukraine, civil authority, collapse of the military resistance against Russia, etc. Poland could move in. This is something that the Russian president had alluded to. It's curious that the Russian president brought this up because while he didn't greenlight it, he spoke of the permanence of any such Polish action. And one has to wonder, was he giving Poland an idea about the partition of Ukraine? And why would this be important? Because it solves the Western Ukrainian problem. If we have a general collapse of Ukraine, what to do with Western Ukraine is one of the burning questions, and a Russian occupation is impractical. But leaving Western Ukraine to sit there and fester as a cancer is also impractical. But having Poland take over means that Poland now owns that problem. The other thing it does is gets Poland involved in the partitioning of Ukraine. Right now, Russia is the only nation that's partitioned Ukraine. But if Poland gets involved in the partition of Ukraine, that's a NATO member, that's a European Union member, and suddenly it's difficult to criticize Russia for its actions. And if Poland starts partitioning, there's every reason to believe that Hungary and Romania might get involved in the partition as well, and it would be very disruptive to Europe. And one could see maybe Putin planting the seeds of that calamitous idea in the Polish brain. But I do think that Russia is not looking to expand the conflict in Ukraine at this point in time. And so I think the most important message from Russia is that any intervention into Western Ukraine, any intervention in Ukraine by Poland or other outside parties would be a precipitous act for which there would be a tremendous consequence.
Hier nochmal konkret nachgefragt, Scott. Wie würde sich eine solche polnisch-ukrainische Union auf die Stabilität in Europa auswirken? Könnte sie zu einem Gleichgewicht der Kräfte beitragen? Und wie würde Russland auf eine solche Union reagieren?
I think it's in Russia's interest to have a stable Europe. Therefore, anything that would be disruptive to Europe would be disruptive to Russia's security, because they would have a very non-secure situation, especially right there on their border. If Poland gets in the business of partitioning Western Ukraine and seeking to absorb it, what they've done is they've undone a sort of a foundational concept since the end of the Second World War, that of permanence of borders in Europe, that the borders that were agreed to at the end of the Second World War are permanent borders, and they needed to be permanent so as to avoid the temptation by nations as history progresses to redraw the borders through military force. One can, in this regard, speak of Silesia, which was German, but was given to Poland. One can speak of Alsace-Lorraine, which the Germans and the French have been going back and forth on. We can go on Trieste. The Italians have it. The Croatians say it's theirs. There's many places in Europe where the borders could be redrawn. And if Poland gets involved in the redrawing of the Ukrainian borders, that is a disruptive act that could resonate. Any effort by Poland to tilt the balance of power in Europe in its favor would, of course, be seen by Russia as a unwelcome act. But we need to keep things in perspective. Poland is not, and will never be a world power. Russia is a world power. And so any notion of Poland changing the balance of power is a notion that exists purely in the Polish mind. It's not grounded in reality.
Bleiben wir beim Thema Polen und Ukraine. Das russische Militär hat bekannt gegeben, dass Anfang Juni bei Lwow eine große Anzahl polnischer und deutscher Söldner eliminiert wurden. Insgesamt sollen seit Februar vergangenen Jahres 5000 ausländische Söldner von russischen Streitkräften getötet worden sein. Was sagst du zu diesen Zahlen? Welche Rolle spielen ausländische Söldner für die Kriegsführung der Ukraine? Und welche Rolle spielt Deutschland dabei?
I mean, it's clear that the Ukrainian government has been inviting foreign fighters to come and serve in Ukraine. I think they created the International Legion of the territory. And it's also clear that many thousands of foreigners have taken advantage of this. According to the Russian numbers, upwards of 10,000 have. 5,000 of them have perished, 5,000 have left, and a few thousand remain. When we look at those numbers, let's just say 15,000 mercenaries is a wild guess. It's not an inconsequential number, but nor is it an overwhelming number, meaning that, for instance, NATO just finished training 60,000 Ukrainian forces for the current counteroffensive. That's literally 4 times the number of mercenaries involved. Mercenaries, I think, have a peripheral impact. They have been used as shock troops. They've been used to stiffen up defensive lines, but they are not a decisive factor on the battlefield. I think the Russian point is that, if they come, then they will either die or go home disappointed, but there's no future for foreign mercenaries on the ground in Ukraine fighting against Russia. And you asked about the role of Germany. I think Germany, like other European nations, has been hyping up an anti-Russian stance that has resonated amongst certain elements of its population. And there are those within that element of population who have decided that the best way to act on the need to confront Russia is to take up arms against Russia by serving in Ukraine as a foreign fighter, as a mercenary. There are Germans doing this. There's French doing this. There's Swedes. So my understanding is that Germany is not the largest participant in this endeavor. And at the end of the day, it's up to the individual who makes this decision, and it's up to the government of Germany. Are they going to tolerate this? Do they turn a blind eye to this? Are they actively seeking to quash any effort by German citizens to go fight in Ukraine, or are they saying, no, go fight? And again, I just asked Germans to reflect on the idea, the imagery of Germans fighting on Ukrainian soil against Russians. It's not a good look.
Und was sagst du zur Rolle von US-Söldnern in der Ukraine? Was ist mit Trevor Reed, einem US-Bürger, der in der Ukraine verwundet wurde? Die US-Regierung betonte schnell und deutlich, dass Reed sich auf eigene Faust in die Ukraine begeben und dort keine Regierungsaufträge ausgeführt habe.
I can't imagine any circumstances under which Trevor Reed would be a U.S. government employee at this time. He was incarcerated in Russia for a significant period of time. If he was seeking to join the U.S. or rejoin the U.S. government, he would be there would have to be a period of evaluation to make sure that he's psychologically fit for the job, that he hasn't been turned by the Russians, a Manchurian candidate, so to speak. So the idea that he transitioned into a government employment, especially some sort of secretive government employment, is absurd. Trevor Reed, I believe, went to Ukraine on his own volition. Perhaps he has some hard feelings about being incarcerated by the Russians, and he failed to act out on these feelings, and he's paid the price. It's a price that, the majority of the mercenaries are going to pay. There's no place for these people in Ukraine, none whatsoever, and their future is not bright. And in the case of Trevor Reed, it's a future now that he has to live without the use of his legs, which I believe he lost. And I can't say tragically. It's not a tragedy when a mercenary goes over on foreign soil to engage in activities that are by their very nature illegal. Um, so I don't have any sympathy for Trevor Reed. I don't have any sympathy for any mercenary who loses their life or loses their limb or is otherwise negatively affected by this. I give the same encouragement I give to everybody that's over there who's not a Ukrainian or not a Russian. Leave. It's not your fight. But Trevor Reed chose to make it his fight, and now he's paid the price.
Die deutsche Politik feiert derzeit den Bau einer Rheinmetall-Fabrik zur Reparatur von Leopard-2-Panzern nahe der ukrainischen Grenze. Welchen Nutzen hat eine solche Einrichtung? Zu welchem Preis wird sie erkauft? Die russische Außenamtssprecherin Maria Sacharowa warnte bereits, dass diese Fabrik zu einem legitimen Kriegsziel werden könnte.
Yeah, I'm not a German industrialist. I don't know the relationship that they have with the host government in terms of tax breaks, et cetera. So I can't give you a figure of what the cost is. It isn't cheap. It's also not practical. I mean, one has to think of the absolute impracticality of what they're talking about. The Ukrainian military receives Leopard tanks. The Leopard tanks go forward into battle where they're damaged. Rather than being taken back to a rear area depot within Ukraine where they could be rapidly repaired, they have to be taken out of the country to a specialized facility that has to be purpose-built to be repaired and then returned to Ukraine. So the effective cost of the vehicle is, gone up by orders of magnitude, and the inefficiency of the operation, the amount of time the vehicle is out of service, unavailable to the Ukrainians, is again, it's just this proves that this is about politics. This is about the imagery of being seen as supporting Ukraine as opposed to really providing practical support to Ukraine. Is the factory a legitimate target? Of course it is. Of course it is. And if this was a war, a formal war between Russia and NATO, that factory would no longer exist. It would be destroyed. But because Russia is not looking for a fight with NATO, they're not going to strike this facility. That cannot be said for any Rheinmetall factory that might be produced on Ukrainian soil. And there's a lot of talk about that happening. And I can pretty much guarantee you that so long as there's a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the life expectancy of any such factory could be measured in minutes. It'll never get built. It'll be destroyed.
Aber da nochmal nachgehakt, welchen Nutzen haben die deutschen Leopard-Panzer, ob nun Leopard 1 oder Leopard 2, für die Ukraine? Sind die Leopard-Panzer ein effektives, ein gutes Waffensystem?
Well, they're not a useful weapon at all. They're an impractical weapon. They make no sense from the standpoint of Ukraine. The Ukrainian troops don't know how to use it, don't know how to repair it. They're ineffective weapons. They're old weapons. I mean, these aren't new weapons. The Russians have been preparing to kill these weapons for decades, and they're proving the effectiveness of the Russian preparations. The Leopard tanks are being destroyed the moment they enter combat. They've had zero effectiveness on the battlefield, which means that by providing them to the Ukrainians, they've actually weakened Ukraine significantly. One, the Ukrainians had a lot of hopes and expectations pinned on this tank. It was supposed to be the miracle weapon. It's supposed to reverse the tide of battle. They're all dead. They're all dying. They're all having to be taken out to be repaired. They've weakened the Ukrainians. And think of the psychological impact on the Ukrainian soldier being told that this is a miracle weapon, a wonder weapon, and suddenly realizing it's nothing but a death trap. Some anecdotal stories say that the Ukrainians are doing their best to break the tanks before they get to the battlefield because they know the moment they appear on the battlefield, they'll be killed. So this has been an absolute negative for the Ukrainians. It's a horrible weapon system. It should never have been provided to Ukraine.
Schauen wir zu einem anderen Krisenherd, nämlich nach Korea. Mittlerweile sind 2 US-Atom-U-Boote in Südkorea eingetroffen. Nordkorea und China kritisieren, dass die USA damit die Spannungen in der Region anheizen. Zu welchem Zweck stationieren die USA zum ersten Mal seit den 1980er Jahren Atom-U-Boote entlang der koreanischen Halbinsel? Welchen militärischen Nutzen haben die beiden U-Boote?
Look, it's purely a political act. It has nothing to do with legitimate national security. These submarines, to be effective, need to be in the open ocean, hiding, silent, waiting to be called upon to do their job. Instead, they're in a port. So while they're in the port, they're dead. People need to understand that. If a submarine's in a port facility and a war breaks out, the submarine is dead. If there's a time of crisis and the submarine is forced to flee the port, understand that it is giving the enemy a known location where they're at, and the enemy will have an opportunity to track them or have a better opportunity to track them and kill them when the time comes. So from a military standpoint, this is actually the dumbest thing possible. But from a political standpoint, you're sending a signal to the South Koreans and indeed the Japanese that the United States nuclear deterrent is available, and that if a war came where North Korea used nuclear weapons, that the United States would be able to retaliate in a way that that punished North Korea's efforts. And the idea is to let North Korea know ahead of time that that's the fate, therefore deterring North Korea from using nuclear weapons. So one can make the argument that that's what's happening. But I simply say that all you're doing is making it easier for North Korea, because they will time their attack, if they do attack, to a point in time when these submarines are in the port, and then the submarines are just coffins.
Und was ist mit den Atomraketen an Bord der U-Boote? Stellen sie eine direkte Bedrohung Chinas dar?
Any nuclear weapon in the hands of any nation endangers anybody in the range of that weapon. Nuclear weapons are an inherent danger to mankind, humankind. They should be canceled. A nuclear weapon has no conscience. A nuclear weapon goes where it's told to go, and it is told to go by humans who are responding to instructions from governments that have policies that oftentimes put them in conflict with other nations. The United States right now is in a situation of conflict with China, not war, but we are in a period of heightened tensions. And there is discussion of a potential conflict between the United States and China over the South China Sea, the islands that are there, or the Taiwan Strait. So yes, the missiles on board these submarines pose an imminent and direct threat to communist China, and the communist Chinese are right to view these weapons as such a threat and to take whatever measures necessary to mitigate against that threat.
Vergangene Woche war der ehemalige US-Außenminister Henry Kissinger in Peking. Dort wandte er sich eindrücklich an die Weltöffentlichkeit und betonte die Notwendigkeit einer friedlichen Koexistenz zwischen den USA und China. Findet seine Stimme Gehör in Washington und der US-Gesellschaft?
Two things. One, Henry Kissinger and China have a relationship that goes back to the early 1970s, and it's a good relationship. It's a relationship based upon friendship. So Henry Kissinger is not going to travel to China for the purpose of setting China up for a war against the United States. If he traveled to China, it's because he's putting his considerable reputation and experience on the line to create the conditions for peace between the United States and China. And Henry Kissinger would not have traveled to China without the approval of the U.S. government. This is a man who used to be a Secretary of State, a man who used to be the National Security Advisor, a man who has a tremendous amount of experience and respect in the world today. He is very influential. When Henry Kissinger speaks, people listen. And so I view this trip as a trip that's been approved by the United States in an effort to open communication lines with China with the goal of preventing an escalation of tensions that could lead to a potential conflict.
Kommen wir zur letzten Frage, Scott. Was ist deine Meinung? Können die USA und China friedlich koexistieren? Und was wäre dafür notwendig?
Well, we currently peacefully coexist with China. We're not at war with China. We've been peacefully coexisting with China for some time now. So clearly the answer, if there's a possibility of peaceful coexistence, the answer is yes. The question is, can we sustain this on the current trajectories that both our nation and China are taking? We have an expansive China starting to move into geopolitical terrain that has previously been the exclusive domain of the United States. And we have the United States needing to adapt to this reality. And the question is, how do they adapt? Do they adapt by forcefully opposing China's expansion? Do they adapt by coming up with soft power techniques to resist Chinese expansion? Or do they adapt to new realities in the world and retool their approach to the Pacific, where they accept as a inevitable reality a powerful China that is coexisting with the United States in the Pacific? and this is a question that is still unanswered at this point in time. Depending on the answer to those questions, you will be able to determine whether or not the United States will be able to peacefully coexist with China going forward.
Vielen Dank, Scott, für deine Zeit und deine Analysen.
Okay, thank you.
Bis nächste Woche. Liebe Zuschauer, euch herzlichen Dank fürs Zusehen. Wenn euch die Sendung gefallen hat, teilt das Video bitte breit in den sozialen Medien, abonniert eben noch unseren Kanal Gegen Polen. Da haben wir neben Scott Ritter viele weitere spannende Berichte und Analysen. Bis dahin, bis nächste Woche. Tschüss.